Hello, we are starting module 12 today. So, till now we have focused on language development, language acquisition, covering various domains from phonology to syntax and then communication. We have also looked at the second language acquisition through various factors of age, input with respect to childhood bilingualism and adult bilingualism and so forth. This is today we are starting with the last module of the course. This module will focus on atypical development. Atypical as in apart from the normal population, normally developing children, we are looking at the language disorders, language delays of a few kinds, not all of them. We will focus mostly on those which are more well researched, more well known, and we have more literature on them, and which are more studied in terms of language related disorders or language related delays. Those will be focused. So, the roadmap is somewhat like this, starting with language and cognitive functions. The main question that we are asking here is language acquisition an independent method, or is it a module specific process, or is it a interdependent kind of a development where language acquisition is also dependent on other modules. So, of course, we have discussed many of these things, but atypical language development is yet another domain that has enriched this debate over a period of time, and hence we will start with that question, and then we will take up various kinds of disorders and delays. So, we will start with specific language impairment or SLI, and then we will follow up with other kinds like Williams syndrome, developmental dyslexia, autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome. Then we will also talk about some of the interventions, and then of course, the last module will wrap up this entire course. There we will be having some concluding remarks, we will summing it up. Each module I will sum up what we have discussed and what are the take home lessons, and then of course, we will sign off with some latest trends in this domain. So, let us start with lecture 1. Lecture 1, as I just said, will focus on the question whether language development and cognitive processes are linked or are they separate. What does the data from what do the data from the various kinds of disorders tell us? Where are we with respect to this kind of data? Because this is where we will try and see certain disorders where sometimes the only one of the two faculties is specifically obstructed, specifically affected, but in some other cases on the other hand we will see more of an interdependent sort of a processing. For example, the language disorder will be co-occurring with some other kind of cognitive disorders, that is another kind. So, one by one we will go through all of these. But first let us look at, let us set the stage, let us look at what we mean by atypical development. So far we have discussed language development in different stages through different kinds of linguistic parameters. Then our entire focus throughout the last 11 modules has been on the typically developing children, who are also called neurotypical children. So, children who develop normally, who are typically developing children with the typical milestones as far as age is concerned, they will have been and they would have achieved, and that is the scenario within which we understood how language acquisition takes place. So, but then there are also some data points that have told us about some differences in terms of cross linguistic studies. So, in English language some of the theories hold more true for English, but not so good in many other languages, that also we have seen. So, there are some differences, slight differences in cross cultural, cross linguistic scenario. Similarly, within the same language also sometimes individual differences do occur, because every individual is different. So, their growth trajectories also might be slightly different from one another, but largely the reason why we always talk about a range is because of this very factor, because individuals might differ, but overall entire community might be falling within the same age range in terms of their growth, or in terms of their cognitive development, language development and so on. However, there is also a group of people, a group of children, a number is actually not that less, sizable population. Their differences seem to be fall beyond that range. They are not minor small differences between different members of the community, but their differences fall widely outside this range. So, these are the people whom we refer to as atypical children, or children who are suffering from some form of developmental disorder or delay. So, that is the population we will be focusing on in this. Now, how do you know who is atypical, who is not within the normally developing range? So, typically there are many test batteries which discussing them is not within the scope of this course, but there are many test batteries that are used for diagnostic purposes. So, using those diagnostic tools, some children will be put together in some bracket or the other. So, typical procedure goes like this: the target group will be matched with two separate typically developing control groups as in who do not have that problem, who do not exhibit those language learning or in other cognitive deficits. So, they are the target group. So, the target group will have two control groups. One group will be age matched, that is chronological age match. So, when we talk about age, we talk about two kinds of age, the chronological age and the mental age. So, chronological age might be 10, but mental age can be let us say 3 years. We have seen the case of Isabel, for example, when she was found out, she had the mental age of a very small child. So, mental age and chronological age may not always go together. So, that is why this is used in diagnosis purposes. So, one batch will be matched on chronological age, another batch will be on mental age. Now, these groups are of course derived from through various standardized tests, and based on the comparison between the target group and the CA group and target group and the MA group, there are different kinds of possible outcomes. For one, the target group might show an impairment compared with the chronological age matched group, but not with the mental age matched group. So, they might not be at par with, so let us say a 5-year-old child from the target group may not be doing as well as the 5-year-old normal child, but they might be doing well with, let us say, a 2-year-old child who is age matched. Mental age match. So, in this case, when the gap is only with the CA but not with the MA group, the individuals in this group will be considered to exhibit developmental delay on this ability. It is not entirely, they are not entirely off, they are simply little bit delayed because they are matching the mental age matched group. So, that is why this first case will be considered a case of developmental delay. However, it is also possible that the target group will not match with the control group in both cases as well. So, when the target group shows an impairment compared with both the control groups like CA and MA group, in that case the target group is considered to exhibit developmental deviance or atypicality. So, when they do not match even the mental age matched group, that is when the problem is a little bit more severe. That is when they are called, they are said to be within the developmental deviance group, or they are atypical children. Now, this is one of the methods that is kind of a classic method. This has been used for a long time, but over a period of time these methods have been questioned and newer methods have been proposed. One of the new methods is called developmental trajectory or the growth model. This is an alternate to the classical model. In this model, the idea is the entire theory is based on the idea of developmental trajectories or growth models, where the aim is to construct a function linking performance with age and specific experimental tasks. So, it is not a blanket sort of a terminology, but based on tasks, based on various kinds of experimental tasks on which they will decide the kind of functionality that the child is capable of. So, as a result, they will assess whether this function differs from the typically developing group and the disorder group. So, creating function wise, based on functions, they will create certain kinds of experimental paradigms, and then on that they will check. Okay, so, this is a more an over period of time. So, how through their growth, how do they change and so on. So, that is a different and comparatively new model that has been proposed. Of course, there are many there are debates around this, but we are not going there. So, what are the kinds of disorder, what are the kinds of delays that we have? Broadly speaking, they can be of 3 types. There are many others, but broadly these are the behavioral or neurodevelopmental or emotional disorders. In case of each such kind of disorders, not always, but in some of these disorders, language abilities are also affected. So, there are some behavioral issues where language will be affected. There are some neurodevelopmental disorders also where language learning will be affected. Similarly, emotion dependent certain kinds of disorders are there where language can be also affected, but there are other cases where language is not affected. So, there is this kind of a connection between language and other kind of mental disorder. And in some cases the disorders might persist well into adulthood. So, some of the disorders may not last in the entire life, it might fade away in adulthood, but some of them might last longer. Let us look at some definitional issues and what we mean by neurodevelopmental disorders. Neurodevelopmental disorder used to be called mental retardation earlier. Before it was defined as neurodevelopmental disorder. This disorder basically is a set of syndromes affecting the central nervous system, that is why neurodevelopmental. So, when the central nervous system, various aspects within the central nervous system is affected, as a result of which there are various degrees of cognitive deficiency or cognitive delay and a lack of adaptive behavior. That is when we term it as a neurodevelopmental disorder. So, because of certain kinds of issues with the central nervous system, which is reflected through cognitive disorders and a lack of adaptability and so on, that is what we call as NDD in short. So, which all kinds of disorders come in this? There are a number of disorders that are clubbed together under NDD. For example, intellectual disability, developmental delay, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, then Down syndrome, Williams syndrome and so on. So, these are all clubbed together as neurodevelopmental disorders. In the initial stages, initial discussions of NDD, even blindness and epilepsy were part of it, but later they were removed. According to Bishop, the term neurodevelopmental disorder is used in 2 main ways. One is all conditions affecting children's neurological development with known genetic or acquired etiology. So, when the conditions affecting the child has a known history, for example, some kind of a genetic or other sort of etiology, then it is this is one type. The other type would be conditions when multifactorial etiology, in which certain aspects of neurodevelopmental areas are selectively impaired. So, there are the 2 types. So, certain kinds. So, for example, in the first case you have this Fragile X syndrome, Rett syndrome, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy and so on. In the second condition you have ASD, all of that, ADHD and everything. So, the first case is the conditions will affect children's neurological development with a known etiology. In the other case, it is a multifactorial kind of a scenario where certain aspects of neurodevelopment is selectively impaired, not everything is impaired. Okay. Now, these are certain kinds of manuals from where these definitions come, who are responsible for giving us which category, which category includes which kind of disorders. So, this is the most commonly utilized one is called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, DSM. So, as per DSM 5, this goes through updating every few years. So, 2013 version DSM 5, they put ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, that is ASD, intellectual disability, communicative disorder, so on and so forth, all as neurodevelopmental disorders. So, typically the common thread among all of them is, though it is though when we define, we say that neurodevelopmental disorders include all of this. However, as we go ahead, we will see that because there is a lot of overlap of symptoms as well as cognitive deficits among many of these disorders, it is not very easy to make a airtight compartment between, let us say, autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. That kind of a thing. So, there are many interlaced factors that are responsible, as a result of which one of the most common thread among these is that they are multifactorial in origin, has a steady course through maturational stages, unlike post puberty psychiatric disorders. So, there is a steady course. So, there are stages through which these disorders will develop. Post puberty psychiatric disorders are a different kind of disorder which we are not talking about here. Then slow early onset of neurocognitive deficits. In the beginning, the neurocognitive deficits will onset very slowly, they will reveal themselves, and typically, though not always, it affects males more. Most of the time it is the males who get affected. Not always, there is no one size fits all, but this is a general trend. Now, this is the overall NDD category, but let us look at our main agenda here, our main focus here, which is the language disorder. So, the same DSM 5 which is given by American Psychiatric Association, they from their perspective, language disorders will be including these features. So, early onset of symptoms and persistent difficulties in language acquisition. This will affect both comprehension and production, may not be in the same degree. For example, we have already seen that in a typically developing child, comprehension always precedes production, and comprehension for a time window, for a particular time window, comprehension is always done better. They do better in comprehension task as opposed to production task. That difference, that asymmetry is seen in some of the disorders as well. However, on a broader level, both comprehension and production will be showing deficits, and it is how do we what are the particular areas where we see this? These are characterized by reduced vocabulary, limited sentence structure, and discourse impairment. So, even for example, taking turns or taking a cue and contributing to a dialogue, or even starting a dialogue or responding to a dialogue, everything alongside various kinds of grammatical domains, all of them are open to be affected. So, that is when we call it a language disorder. Now, type of language disorder, there are primarily two, of course there are many, but for our purposes, because we started this lecture with the question whether language disorder and cognitive disorder always go hand in hand, or language and this will in turn take us to the question of the modularity versus the interdependent kind of a structure. So, keeping that in mind, here we will talk about two kinds of impairments. One is the language deficits occur together with a known biomedical condition. So, language disorder is not the only thing that the child is going through. The child also has a well known or well diagnosed biomedical condition. In this case, the situation will be, it is part of a more complex pattern of impairment. It is in the sense, the language disorder in this case is part of a more complex and more larger pattern of complex disorders. This condition typically will be called as a differentiating condition. So, in that case, the label will be language disorder associated with X. the X being whichever biomedical condition the child has. So, this is how it is defined. So, when the language impairment happens alongside with some other kind of biomedical condition, we call it language disorder associated with this. For example, ASD children have language related delays and disorders. So, in that case we will say language deficiency or language delay in autism spectrum disorder, like that. So, X is the known case. These differentiating conditions include intellectual disability as well as autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum, it is called a spectrum because it is not a pointed, one point, there are multiple, there is a graded sort of a disease. Some children might suffer it, suffer more, some children might suffer little mildly, some very in very less degree and so on. So, it is a spectrum, that is why it is called autism spectrum disorder. In some other cases, language learning deficit can occur in the absence of cognitive, neurological or environmental causes, without any apparent cause actually. For example, the primary language disorder known as specific language impairment. Specific language impairment has been studied for a very long time now, and it actually became quite an important, became a turning point in the nativism versus nativist argument about language, the modularity of the brain and so on, because it was connected with one particular mutation of the gene which we discussed in the first in the beginning, first module while talking about evolution. SLI connected with FOXP2 was used as a very important theoretical position on evolution of language as well. Anyway, so the first published work on developmental language impairment date from the 1800s with Gall. Initial reports were provided by neuroscientists and psychologists presenting case reports. Initially there used to be case reports which from the psychologists and other medical practitioners. So, they would often give a report on the on children with seemingly normal cognitive abilities and concurrent language learning deficits. So, this is where it all started, all the way from 1800s. So, normal cognitive abilities and concurrent language learning deficits is how it was initially reported. Eventually, it got a name, specific language impairment, and recently this name has also been changed, and now it is known as, it is renamed as developmental language disorder or DLD. Nonetheless, this disorder basically refers to a disease that is that seems to have nothing to do with cognitive problems, cognitive deficits. So, there are different approaches to studying language disorders. Let us look at very briefly as to the different, what are the kind of approaches that we have. So, as I was just saying, the finding of SLI marked a very important turn in understanding of language and cognition processes, their interrelationship and so on. So, the nativist perspective states that it is a set of genes specifically targets domain specific modules. So, a specific gene which we will see eventually is FOXP2. So, certain kind of mutation in the genetic code affects certain kinds of domain specific modules at the as the end product of the epigenesis. So, certain aspects of language related processes gets affected because of certain kinds of genetic mutation. That is the idea of the nativistic scope. So, for example, syntactic module, morphological module or a more narrowly pre-specified module for say canonical linkage rules in grammar. So, some specific grammatical property might be targeted by some specific genetic issues. That is the nativist approach, as a result of which we call this a domain specific issue. However, there have been many questions raised in terms of whether the deficit results from damage to a domain specific starting point at the cognitive level. There is no consensus on this, though there are lots of supporters of this view. On the other hand, we also have something called cognition hypothesis. If you recall, we have talked about Jean Piaget's cognitive developmental stages of children. All children go through certain stages, certain pre-specified stages. So, they are starting with sensory motor stage, and they build up on that initial sensory motor information, the input that they get, on the basis of which they create certain schema in their mind about the world, about their experiences, and then language comes in and gives it a name, some sort of a name, to a label for that, those kinds of categories that they create in their mind. So, that those stages are cognitive development stages of cognitive development. So, in the sensory motor stage, an important milestone is the concept of object permanence. This is what he calls object permanence. Basically refers to the idea that objects have a continual existence and do not cease to exist if it goes out of view. So, if the child is playing with two toys and one toy is taken out of her view, it is not like that toy has ceased to exist, it is still there. So, the continuity of existence, this is an idea that develops around the time, around the sensory motor stage, in the very beginning, in the first stage. Similarly, another important concept which is called the alternative viewpoints. Typically, this is seen through in psychology, this is seen through what is called conservation task. So, the understanding of the same thing may have different kinds of you can look at the same issue from a different perspective, same thing, even a concrete thing, from different perspectives. The most commonly utilized task that children children go through, typically psychologists use, is when water poured from a short and wide glass to a tall and thin glass, both having the same volume. So, when you transfer the water from the short glass to the tall glass, the amount of water remains constant. However, it appears to be, in the second case, appears to be the to be having more. In fact, there is this there are many videos on YouTube and other places where you will see the Starbucks does this exact trick. So, their medium glass and bigger glass actually have play on this particular kind of a dimension. So, these are two important concepts that children acquire in early childhood, the idea of object permanence and the idea of conservation. So, based on this, the idea that language development actually needs these important milestones to be achieved, and on the basis of this, cognition hypothesis was put forward. So, the idea is that language needs certain cognitive precursors in order to develop. So, until and unless some basic cognitive architecture is already in place, certain basic ideas are already formed, language will not be able to come in. So, that is why you need language. So, the development of object permanence and conservation is necessary for vocabulary development. That is one of the domains that have been studied extensively. So, in short, this theory says that language development is dependent on cognitive development, overall cognitive development, which is the opposite view of the nativists, which says that language development is a very specific kind of a module which might be affected when there is a disorder. It might be affected by a specific genetic mutation or something of that sort, which affects a specific kind of grammatical issues. There are some other models as well to study language disorder. So, the one of the older models is called the single cognitive deficit model. This model guided many of the early works on both the cognitive and genetic causes of developmental disorders, and they would typically look at the relationship in this way. So, they will look at localized brain regions and resulting cognitive deficits, one to one sort of a match. So, single deficit and single outcome, that kind of a thing. So, single problem, one particular, let us say an injury to the brain in a particular area, and one kind of language disorder, one to one mapping of that sort, cognitive deficits and developmental disorders, and the relation between etiologies and developmental disorders. So, that was the kind of viewpoint that single cognitive deficit model took up. So, for example, they would hypothesize that in a single autosomal dominant gene caused the dyslexia. So, for every possible disorder, dyslexia is another language disorder. So, for every possible disorder, there has to be some single origin. That was the idea. However, over a period of time, this also has been updated, and the newer version of this and the more updated version of this is called neuroconstructivist hypothesis. This is basically a multiple deficit model. So, the idea was that many findings starting from psychological, neuropsychological and cognitive science findings pointed to a symptom overlap. As I said in the beginning, in some cases disorders might have overlapping symptoms or sometimes even cognitive overlaps in certain conditions. So, that alongside many other discoveries in the intervening periods, that give us the idea that probably there are multiple types of deficits that could result in different kinds of disorders, and there might be a lot of intermingling between them. So, advances in understanding the complex genetics of behavioral defined developmental disorders also has helped. So, for example, dyslexia, autism, ADHD and all of these might have some overlapping symptoms, sometimes overlapping cognitive deficits as well. So, as a result of which now we know that many of these diseases are multifactorial in origin. So, that is where neuroconstructivist hypothesis comes in. So, with this background in place, now let us look at, do we have a dissociation between cognitive and linguistic disorders or do we not? We will start with SLI, which is specific language impairment. So, how independent is language from other cognitive capacities? Let us look at specific language impairment, which we briefly discussed some time back. So, a specific linguistic deficit alongside otherwise intact intelligence, this is the hallmark of SLI. So, linguistic deficit, but on the other side intact intelligence. So, this is not SLI cannot be connected to any other kind of mental problems, that is the idea. So, somebody said that as if, I quote, as if grammar developed in total isolation of the rest of the growing brain. That is how surprising this disorder is. So, they have there are differences among researchers as to what they claim the specific deficit to be. So, there are inability to make canonical links from grammar to semantics, similarly feature blindness, these things have been proposed. So, the specific kind of problem, but overall the problem is linguistic, but not of any other kind of cognitive or neurological or anatomical problem. This used to be called SLI before, and 2017 the proposal was to call it DLD. So, the a child will be diagnosed with SLI if he scores 2 standard deviations below the age level in a series of language tests. That is how we arrive at the tag of SLI. So, there are those tests on the basis of which if they score below 2 standard deviations below the average, then they will be considered to be falling in that category. So, there is no mental retardation, there is no other kind of perceptual motor deficit, no nothing. So, common features of SLI across subjects, there are various types of problems with respect to SLI. Not every patient exhibits all of them, but these are the common types. So, language will show unexpected patterns and remain below age expectations, and then the most important probably the most important criteria is inflectional morphology, which will show a lot of issues. So, variations of symptoms across subjects will go from not all of them, but acquisition of word, particularly verbs is very difficult. Verbs is difficult for normally developing children as well. So, this is something you see here. Mild phonological deficit, disorders can be repetitive, receptive and expressive, and it can even go till adulthood. So, the etiology of SLI is not known. It has been observed in many studies that it may even run in the family, as it is most common to find children with language related speech disorder like reading and spelling in a family with a child with SLI, as opposed to a family where nobody has SLI. So, if you have an SLI patient in the family, chances are higher that other children will have other kind of language related disorders. That is the main point. So, this is some statistics that we have. Many studies have provided support for the genetic basis of this theory. In fact, that was one of the most important output of the literature in this domain for a very long time. One of the most interesting research was carried out on twins. So, twins as in mono and dizygotic twins. So, twins why they have been used for this study? Because twins share the same environment. Now, in case of monozygotic twins, they share the genes too, but dizygotic twins do not share the gene. They have separate kinds of genetic structure. So, dizygotic twins are typically similar to other siblings. So, that is why comparing mono and dizygotic twins will give us a very clear understanding whether the problem is genetic or it is environmental. So, if it is a genetic problem, then monozygotic twins of SLI children will have higher chances of sharing the disorder than the dizygotic ones. On the contrary, if environment is responsible, then dizygotic ones will also show the same problem, but findings typically show that monozygotic twins share the disorder. That is why the idea of SLI having a genetic underpinning was very strong. At the same time, FOXP2 gene mutation was also found. Since I have discussed FOXP2 in detail in the beginning, so we will not go into detail again. FOXP2, a certain kind of particular mutation of FOXP2 gene was found to be present in all the members in a family who had SLI. FOXP2 was first discovered when many members of a single family were found to be having SLI, and that is how it was connected to FOXP2. The disorder was connected to FOXP2. So, the main, as a result of which the question automatically comes in, that is it a modularity based problem? Does it mean that there is a specific kind of, because the language disorder is very specific, no other cognitive disorder is there, and that also also seem to have a genetic underpinning. So, the automatic conclusion might be that it is a modularity based issue. Is it so? So, this has been studied a lot. So, some claim that it affects local aspects of grammar like future tense. In fact, many of the tense markers which take inflection have been reported to be affected. Others have claimed that such children are weak at computing the subject agreement or structure dependent relations, etc. So, there is yet another view that say the grammatical weakness seen among these children actually arises from a perceptual level deficit in the domain of auditory processing. So, these are the three different hypotheses that have been proposed. So, these are the areas where they typically have problems. So, obligatory expression of tense, expression of agreement, cannot represent structure dependent relations, inflectional features and auditory processing system. Inflectional features often connect with the expression of agreement and tense marking. So, that is one major area. So, this is where we will complete lecture 1. In lecture 2, we will carry on this discussion. We will see many other features of SLI, and also we will discuss Williams syndrome, another disorder which seem to point towards a modularity. Thank you.